ready.
Is that
It's just to give me it. Well, now I've got 3 of them.
could that be included?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is week 1 of our new teaching series, Through the Lens, where we're looking at movies and kind of asking the question, what can we learn about the world? What can we learn about ourselves? What can we learn about God, right, through kind of looking at cultural elements. Mike's already laughing. Anyway, joined this week by Mike, by Kyle. We love movies. We love to talk about movies.
Yep.
And so just want to start by asking, like, this series, this idea of looking at film, of looking at culture, why is this an important exercise or a helpful exercise for Christians?
Well, I think we're called to this culture. We're called to be missional in this culture. So, Paul uses the illustration of being an ambassador. So, we need to know kingdom values. We need to exemplify them. We need to understand kingdom truths, gentleness and humility and forgiveness and redemption. But then we need to understand the culture to which we're called, because we need to communicate those values in this culture. And so part of that is, what does our culture care about? What stories are they telling? What are they afraid of? What do they think of the future? What does love mean to them? I mean, all these things are things that books, movie stories deal with. They tell us a lot about the world the culture in which we live. And that should be something that we're versed enough in to be able to translate kingdom values, the gospel, into a language that's recognizable. And I think it's hard to do. I mean, the more culturally disconnected we are, just the more difficult that is, and the less common ground we find, and it just becomes difficult to be missional.
For sure. Kyle, what about movies specifically, are meaningful to you? Why are you drawn to these stories?
Yeah, I think to Mike's point, one of the things I love about movies is it is common ground. Like, it sort of becomes common ground. So I love to watch films. I certainly watch things just to be entertained at times, but to reflect on things, to reflect on what they reveal about different things in the world, what they reveal about me. And then I think it's such a easy conversation to have then with people, whether it's something like an Avengers movie or Quiet Place or something like that. If you've both seen it, then there's a common ground, and there's things to talk about, and there's stuff to learn about yourself and about other people.
Yeah, I think that's good. I mean, right, if one of our callings as Christians is to evangelize, to talk about the gospel story, the thing that we say that we believe, finding common ground is so important. I took a class in seminary. Dennis Hack, who he ran kind of an organization called Ransom Fellowship, where they would review movies, would review music, and kind of ask, hey, what can we learn about God?
Yeah.
What can we learn about our world? Kind of what we're doing. And he was telling the story of how he would go to the movie theater, and he loved going to the movie theater. He'd go to movies by himself a lot, and he would just strike up conversations with the workers there. And
cool.
So one of the concession, the girls who worked concessions, he would just ask, hey, what kind of movies do you like? And I think at the time, this is not an endorsement I'm about to say, but at the time, she really liked the movie Knocked Up. Knocked Up was out in theaters, and he's like, okay, I'm going to go see that movie.
Yeah.
So that I can talk to this person that I have conversations with every week. And again, maybe that's a bad example of the type of movie we should or shouldn't watch, but I love the heartbeat behind it. Like, that movie appeals to someone.
And I think I'm kind of fascinated by what movies appeal to people too.
Yeah.
I love, I could just talk film all the time. And part of that is I love looking at lists. I love seeing AFI's top 100. I also just love hearing what's your favorite 3 movies. I love those kind of things because oftentimes they're movies that I like a whole lot too, so it's easy to talk about. But it just reveals something interesting about people to know if their favorite movie is a cartoon, or if it's a horror film, or if they love action movies, whatever it is. I'm interested in that.
I think too, it's important missionally, as we've been saying, But I think it's also, because all of us are image bearers, these films demonstrate beauty to us. They say something true about the world, like in their own right, and just in and of themselves, they can produce joy, laughter, beauty. They say something true, even beyond being missional. They're ways in which we can understand the world that we live in for our own lives, that we can see beauty, that we can appreciate truth. Even movies that are not, even that it would be secular, and I don't really love that division. But because they're image bearers and they're gifted in their craft, they can make a movie that's simply beautiful in its own right, and that's important.
Can you say more about? We use that phrase a lot, to be an image bearer. What does that mean?
Well, I mean, Genesis, we were made. All of us were made in the image of God, and so all of us are image bearers. Now, all of us are fallen image bearers, so we all bear the image of God, and we all blur the image of God at the same time. But that's believer and unbeliever both. That whether or not, Mozart was a Christian, and I don't believe he was, he, as an image bearer, the only way he can create objects of beauty is because he bears God's image. And so I can recognize the beauty in his work, even if, he's not a believer, because it's really not about, it's about we're all image bearers, fallen image bearers. And so sometimes beauty for its own sake, God made beauty as an expression of him. And so I think that's the sense in which we can find beauty in all sorts of work, because God is the source of truth and beauty and joy. And as image bearers, somebody can make a movie, and I don't really know where they are spiritually, but it could be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's good. 2 weeks ago, Ben was preaching here. We were kind of wrapping up our Love Where You Live series, and he made this point, or I'd summarize it as this. He was talking about neighbors that they had at a previous house, and how they learned from their neighbors hospitality. And their neighbors, he didn't believe were Christians, but he learned things that were still good from them that we would say, oh yeah, that's a Christian trait, because it represents something about
goodness.
God. It's goodness.
It's goodness, and God is the source of goodness for everybody, including people who aren't believers. And yes, we can see goodness in other people. Yeah.
I think that's such a gift and a wonderful perspective shift, because then you just see God everywhere. When you're open to it, you see the beauty.
When you see beauty, you're seeing Him.
Yeah.
Because where else can it come from?
That's a wonderful thing.
And I think for me too, I think of Westminster, right? What is the chief end of man? To glorify God and enjoy Him forever. Part of our calling is to recognize and appreciate beauty. Like in that, there is an element of, I am doing what I've been created to do by recognizing, acknowledging beauty that somebody else has created, whether it's writing a compelling story, whether it's even when it comes to movies, the cinematography, all the different parts of what that experience is.
Yeah, I bring up another movie, 1917. Is, I feel like, one of the most beautiful movies I've seen in recent years, and he did it all as a one, it's all a one shot, that he cleverly put a bunch of shots together to look like one, but there's something beautifully creative about that, and then the cinematography is just beautiful.
I'm glad you brought that up. So this weekend, JJ was preaching, and kind of the big idea was purpose, and we movies that often take characters on a quest of some sort, and my mind immediately went to 1917. Just because you have this character who it's really interesting. He's kind of apathetic towards the ways, he's jaded. One character gets excited about medals, and he had traded his medal, for was a bottle of wine or something. And then something happens, and he's on a journey to take this news. And he finds purpose in that. We see that quest. Incredible story. What other movies come to mind? Right, which is with that theme, right? Purpose.
First one that came to mind for me is Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which is kind of a coming of age story for a guy that, what is he, in his probably 40s in the movie?
Ben Stiller's character.
Who's lived a certain way and then is invited into sort of a journey of self-discovery. So I think the purpose for him in that movie is just kind of figuring out how to live a larger life than he ever has. He lives in daydreams, in that movie, and they're really fantastical, and they're like, I don't know, they're really cool. But then he, like, that's all it is, and he's invited into living those daydreams out and traveling the world. And yeah, I love any coming of age story like that.
Yeah. Mike, what about you?
I mean, I think it's hard to think of a movie that doesn't have some element of purpose. Usually, I mean, it's a story about something that has some sort of meaning. And I think we just take that for granted as if, well, of course. But I think that's part of being an image bearer, and part of, like, we are in this big epic story. So we relate to stories that convey some sort of purpose and meaning, whatever that might be. And so, you know, like I said, it's almost any movie you can think of has this element of that in there. Even movies that, you know, The Dark Knight is a movie that...
Yeah.
Okay, so obviously Batman has a purpose to fight for justice, to combat evil, to be, you know, protector, a redeemer in a sense. And the, you know, the Joker is the personification of evil, basically.
Evil. Yeah.
And it's a very sort of accurate depiction of evil, or especially sort of it's sort of a picture of an evil that recruits. That's one of the things I like about it, is that you know, the Joker is not trying to do bad things to people.
No.
He's trying to get you to do bad things.
Yeah, and it's evil for evil's sake.
Evil for evil's sake.
Yeah.
Some people want to watch the world burn, that sort of thing, and you know, so it's this. I mean, it's this, in a sense. Okay, it's a movie about a cartoon character and a fantastical cartoon villain.
Yeah.
But you can't make a movie without some sort of element of purpose to it, unless you're saying something that there is no purpose. You know, some movies are about nothing on purpose, and they're saying something about the purposelessness that they see in creation. So I think it's hard to convey or hard to communicate. What I'm trying to communicate is we sort of take for granted certain things that we have simply because we bear the image. We live in story. We have a purpose. And even apocalyptic movies or post-apocalyptic movies seem to be saying the story went wrong, right? And so is mere survival, is that a purpose enough?
Yeah.
Is that enough of a purpose? Because a lot of people now, that's sort of their purpose is mere survival.
Yeah.
And some of those movies seem to be saying, no, it's not enough, right? It's not enough merely to survive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's Station 11. You and
Station
I both read
11
that. It's
is a book, right? And that
Yeah.
statement's in there. And the statement comes from Star Trek or something.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, the
Yeah.
survival's basically not enough.
Yeah, survival's not enough.
Yeah.
And I think that's a statement about, hey, we're creatures of purpose, which as Christians we totally sign up for.
Yeah.
But obviously that's not a Christian message. It's
Sure.
a message of, because we're image bearers, we need a purpose, and movies circle around that in some way.
Yeah, one of my favorite questions to ask is, you know, is blank a true movie? Right? And because first take, you know, the answer is no.
Right.
This didn't happen. Batman, that he's a made up character. That didn't, you know, doesn't exist. Didn't happen. But I think that what is truth, right? Like, what is this movie trying to communicate?
What truth is it trying to convey?
What truth
Yeah.
is it trying to convey?
Yeah.
And does that truth line up with, or in what ways does that truth line up with the reality that I find myself in? What truth does that line up with this big story that?
Right. And that's one of the things, you know, I was talking about the Joker, is that's one of the most realistic depictions of evil that I've seen in a movie, because it's the whole purpose is to corrupt, not to do bad things, but to corrupt everyone else into doing bad things.
Yeah.
And I think
And
that's
specifically Batman.
specifically
Batman.
Batman.
Trying to corrupt
Yeah.
this hero figure.
He wants to defeat Batman not by killing him,
Right.
but by corrupting him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, well, that's kind of that's the world we live in.
Yeah.
Is the world is seeking to corrupt us in many ways.
Well, and it makes me think of, you know, when Jesus is out in the wilderness and he's being tempted by
Go ahead, eat the bread.
Satan.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right. He's not. Satan doesn't show up to kill Jesus.
No.
He shows up to get him to do something he shouldn't do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, wanted to look at a passage in Acts chapter 17. A lot of times when we talk about evangelism, when we talk about, hey, what does it even look like to preach the gospel or talk about the gospel to people who don't believe it, this is kind of a pillar example, if you will. This is Paul. He is in Athens, and he has the opportunity to have some conversations. He has an opportunity to talk in a very central public sphere with people who were philosophers at the time, people who essentially were very influential when it came to civic and moral law and religion. And so Acts 17, I'm going to read just a couple verses here, starting in 16, and we'll talk, kind of through that a little bit. But 16 says this: "Now while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there." So there's this image, this idea of Paul having conversations, using logic, talking about what he believes with those who were Jewish, those who were God-fearers, so not Jewish, but still worshipped God. And there were those who were also there. Some of the Epicurean and the Stoic philosophers. They also conversed with him. And some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities," because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. And so it's a few kind of things that I want to just kind of point out. One, so these philosophies, right? Epicureanism, Stoicism, like what are these? I have in my notes too.
I don't know. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we were just talking about purpose.
Yeah.
So what is a philosophy?
Yeah.
Any philosophy is some attempt to explain who we are and why we're here, and therefore how should we live.
Yeah.
Right. So Stoicism is this, try to proceed through life with sort of this brave, emotionless.
Be in the moment, be present.
Be in the moment, be present.
Avoid
right.
pain, or don't make decisions based on pain or fear
Right.
or even
Right.
pleasure.
Kind of fly above it all in a sense. And I think Epicurean is
It's kind of the opposite.
Kind of the opposite,
It's
yeah.
kind of the opposite, right? Epicurean,
eat, drink, and be merry.
eat, drink, be
Right.
merry, for tomorrow we die. Like the intrinsic goal is to pursue
Pleasure.
pleasure. And so it's interesting. You have these two groups of philosophers who have different opinions, different views of the world, and yet they unite around their not understanding what Paul is saying. They call him a babbler. The word babbler, this idea of a chicken kind of pecking at seed, not really knowing what it's doing. So it's interesting. They basically say, "Hey, Paul, you're saying things, but you don't really know what
Just
you're
word salad.
talking, what you're
right.
talking about." And so Paul then, he gets this opportunity. They took him, brought him to the
Areopagus.
Areopagus. Thank you. Saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting. For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. So this is him going Mars Hill, preaching the gospel. And what follows here is, I think, a fantastic rubric, because he doesn't just open up the Old Testament and start reading to them. He doesn't just start
Abraham,
quoting
Moses,
Jesus.
law,
Yeah.
Israel, none of that.
Yeah, he says, so Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious." I think that's kind of profound, just as
Yeah.
a way to start
Yeah.
a conversation.
Yeah.
What's Paul doing here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it says earlier, I think in verse 16, he sees all the idols and he's provoked in his spirit. He's like this.
He's troubled.
He's troubled. This should not be so.
Yeah.
We don't exactly know all the full nature of his being troubled, but I think it's easy for us to look on all the things the world is doing and saying and be provoked in our spirit. But he doesn't speak to them from this place of, "Hey, you're provoking my spirit.
Hey,
Stop it.
You stink. You're doing
You're
horrible things.
You're wrong and I'm right." But he then uses their own search because there's idols all around.
Yeah.
So, hey, you're religious. I'm religious. Let's start there. And I think even all they do is stand around and basically trade philosophies on this, in a sense that we were just talking about. That's what every Metro Cinemaplex does,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You can go and see 8 different takes of the world at any one time.
Yeah.
And so it's good for us to sort of be aware of what the stories are being telling, so we can kind of say, oh, so you believe this, I also believe something similar, let me expound on it, which is what he does basically.
And that's what he does. He says, I've walked around your town, I've seen you have temples, you have one even to an unknown God. Let me tell you about him, essentially is what he says. And then as he gets into this description, we find that he actually quotes their own philosophy back to them as he's presenting the gospel. I think that's quite profound, because
That's brilliant. I feel like for me, it sounds like he's entering into a conversation with humility. He could have just entered in with, like you said, hey, I'm going to just tell you what I know is true and just deal. But he seems humble and curious about their culture enough to then speak back into them the things that they're looking into, the things that they believe. Right? I think that's brilliant.
He knows them. I mean, the to the point of being able to quote their own philosophy,
And I think when you say it's coming from care, like it could be manipulation, it could be something else, but I think he's doing it because he cares, he's troubled or whatever, and he's doing it from a caring perspective.
Well, and he has a background in Hellenistic culture, right? His education was Greek, and so for him, it's not just quoting their own stuff because he's trying to manipulate or mission to them, but he's not removed from that culture. So he's finding truth in the things that they believe because it's the world he lives in.
It's the answer to the question, why would you watch that movie? Why would you read that Greek philosopher? It's not Christian. Why do you want to read it? And because there is an element of truth there, because there can be an element of common ground as an image bearer that I can use to, because it's worth it missionally. It's also might be an object of the same reason that we might want to watch a movie or two is so that, we can talk about redemption, a movie about redemption or a movie about purpose. Oh, I see this. This is sort of, what you're saying about purpose or why you like this movie. I think we're creatures of purpose too. It's the same sort of move Paul is making, and it communicates there is something of value in your world. Because otherwise, it's like, why would I care what you're interested in? That's not humility and curiosity, and obviously the person's probably not going to be super open to whatever you got to say at that point, right? So it in itself, it's an expression of care to be well versed enough in what the other person thinks to be able to speak to it. It takes time. I mean, at some point he had to get these philosophers out and spend some time reading them, and not knowing exactly, how that would come into play. But it's good to know what the world is thinking about these things, so I can speak into it.
It seems so much like Jesus too. He seemed to have no ego, to have so much humility, and just be curious and to know people. And I think it's it's in a way a loving act. Like I read a graphic novel a while ago, a couple years ago maybe, about bipolar. The author and illustrator she had bipolar, and I read it to kind of understand my brother a little bit better because he was undiagnosed bipolar. But I also think the gift in that is I entered into a world that I know nothing about, and I got to see a firsthand perspective of what it looks to live with bipolar. And I think that could have helped me greatly in conversations with my brother. My hope is if I have conversations with somebody who has that, I can enter into that differently than I might have before. And it feels like an attempt at just understanding something which feels loving.
No, that's great. And I think, that's the pastoral application here, is that we need to be people that understands the world that we live in. And I think that's for this series. Movies are a great avenue for that. Anything just on your hearts, on your minds as we kind of wrap up? We're going to talk a few of the resources that we have for this series, but any movie particular that you're watching right now, or
Well, we just saw A Quiet Place 2, which is it's not a movie of great. It's not Shakespearean, but it's just fun.
Yeah.
It's just a fun experience, and there's a sort of just a good human element to it. But it's post-apocalyptic in a way. I don't know if you think of it in that sense, but basically, how would you respond if you're basically in mere survival mode? But I do think that the graphic novel example you used, you can't meet 100 people and really get to know their experience deeply, but you can watch movies where you're going to get a view of something that, beyond a textbook, this is how it's experienced in a life.
Yeah.
And that's going to tell you something you just wouldn't know otherwise.
Yeah.
Because the author and the illustrator maybe don't sit down with you
Right.
and even have the ability to explain it like this is what it's like. But if they tell a story in which, I can kind of see what it's like.
Yeah.
And now you probably are better equipped to be missionally engaged with a person with bipolar disorder because you know something about it that goes beyond some textbook knowledge. I think that's the beauty of learning about our world, to be engaged in it. And there's some elements of learning about a world that only story can do.
Yeah, I think that's the gift of arts in general, is that as image bearers, Christians and non-Christians alike are creating just brilliant and beautiful things. And I think, like, I'm somebody who's, I think, pretty aware of my emotions at times now, but not always. I don't always have the best words to express them. I write poetry, so that's my attempt at doing that. But I read a lot of poetry. I read a lot of different books. I listen to a lot of different music, and those things speak to my heart places more than most other things. Movies do, like Secret Life of Walter Mitty. I saw myself in him being called to something larger than the life I'm living. If I read the poet David White, I feel that in his poems. And it's like these people are naming something that I can't name, but I can recognize it and connect to it that way.
That's good. That's really good. Well, thank you guys for joining the deep dive this week. We have put together some resources on our website, calvary.church/through-the-lens. Through the Lens is the name of this series. Those resources include a couple book options for helping us understand and think about culture and the culture we live in, the culture that we get to help influence and create. We have movie discussion guides. So one of our hopes is that over the next month, you will get together with your small group or with friends or family, or just for yourself, and there are some questions to discuss, questions to reflect on. We have a few specific movies that we've highlighted that have been just really influential in our culture over the last several years. We also have a general movie discussion guide that kind of will apply to any movie that you would watch. The deep dives, you can find them there as well, or as on our YouTube channel. So thank you for joining us, and we will catch you again next week.